Welcome, everybody. This is the first episode of what we're calling the Stakeout. My name is Will, coming at you from the EBTC account, alongside our host today. We'll call him the Muscles with the Hustle, Spadaboom. You may recognize both of us from Badger DAO, where we've been actively contributing towards the launch of EBTC, a new Bitcoin primitive built on mainnet powered by ETH Staking. This is, in fact, the account from which we're hosting today. So if you come upon us through alternate channels, feel free to give us a follow for updates on future events and future stakeouts. But enough about us. So what's the Stakeout and why are we here today? The Stakeout's a new event series that invites thought leaders, active builders across the ecosystem to surveil and discuss emerging trends in LSTFi, ETH staking, and so much more. Boy, do we have a stacked lineup to kick us off today. And our topic for today, we thought we'd start with the Great ETH Staking Debate. And who better equipped to dig into this juicy topic than some of the top participants and players in the space. So welcome Seraphim from Lido, Langers from Rocket Pool, Andrew from Coinbase, and Sam from Frax. And of course, our host for today, Spadaboom from Badger. The format for today will be somewhat of like a roundtable discussion. We'll focus on a few key topics within the Stake ETH debate. And after we've concluded our group discussion, and there's time permitting, we'll open up the floor to any listener who wishes to share a comment, ask a question, or join the conversation. So if something comes to mind during the event, feel free to raise your hand so we can bring you up near the end. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Spotter, to kick us off and get the conversation rolling.
Cool, thanks, Will. All right, guys. So I want to have an open flow conversation. We're gonna hold no punches and talk about some of the tough stuff. But I've had the pleasure of collaborating with a few of you guys over the last couple of years building in this space. So I'm always excited to spend some time chatting. So let's get right to it. The first question on the docket, which a lot of people talk about. There's been a lot of debate around this, especially after the merge. And that question is, limit or not to limit? That is the question, as Shakespeare would say. So really, as folks building staking protocols, do you think that protocols should self-limit the amount of ETH that's being staked with them? And I'll let you guys dig into, the pros and cons of some of those things. But why don't we start a bit in the middle here? Sam, why don't you kick it off? Tell us what your opinion is on that.
Sure. I think I have maybe a unique take on this, which is, first of all, obviously I'll go ahead and say I commend Rocket Pool for self-limiting, and I think it's a very, very beautiful thing. One thing that, and people have asked, what about Frax and things like that, and I'll be on the record here and say, yes, I think Frax, if we get there, should self-limit. One thing, though, that I want to say is I just always think that it's a very premature thing, even though people say, signal it. It's better to signal it ahead of time. I think it's a little bit. It's only relevant to Lido right now, which is the huge elephant. The mega elephant sized, protocol in the room, and I think that's obviously their community's choice. But I don't want to say I want to discount it, but I kind of roll my eyes when Frax is like 0.3% or 0.2% of the total validators, or maybe now it's like 1%, right? And everyone is like, well, we don't know if Frax will self-limit. And obviously Rocket Pool is multiple times larger than Frax. It's like 3 times. So it's 3x a little bit more relevant. Obviously Rocket Pool is bigger. But I still don't think for anyone other than Lido, and again, obviously Seraphim will have some unique perspectives there to say for the for the Lido community. But for us, it's just like, it's basically asking, hey Sam, when you're like a trillionaire, how will you spend your first $500 billion or something, right? To me it doesn't make any sense. And obviously I said this with a caveat of, yes, when and if we get that big, I am personally for advocating to self-limit Frax Ether Psi. So I will go on the record and say that. I just think even the the time we're spending here going around this to talk about it in front of everyone, I just think is a little bit silly. So that's always been my perspective on it. I try to avoid talking about it, not because it's some kind of diabolical, like agenda of like we're gonna take over everything or whatever. It's more of like I almost think it's a little bit immodest and kind of self-aggrandizing in terms of like, you know, it's like asking like what are you going to do with your first like mansion when you get it's like how about first actually even getting to the point where this is any relevant to you, right? Or at least to us, right? And so a lot of people, when I discount the self-limiting thing in terms of Frax, they're like, oh, well, that just shows that there's some ulterior kind of motive. It's like, no, the motive is actually hopefully we can continue to grow and focus on growing and not even think about this stuff until it's actually even relevant to us. I almost feel like it's a little bit it it's a little bit insulting to Lido of how small we are, and then people ask us, and whereas Lido is huge, and they actually are the leader, the industry leader. I'm not saying Lido should say that they should limit or whatever. It's up to their community, but I think it's only relevant to Lido. Anyone that asks this question to anyone else is kind of putting the cart before the horse, and so that's just my view on it. So yeah.
Well, I'm going to point the question then at Seraphim, but before I do that, Sam, let me kind of just extend that question or throw a little tangent on that question and say, should Lido self-limit then, in your opinion?
My view on this is also probably a little bit different in the sense that I think there's both legitimate arguments for and against it. So I'm pro if Frax gets there to self-limit. However, I also have the view that it's an Ethereum kind of design flaw if there is the possibility to have protocols rehypothecating ETH, right? And then being able to essentially take over the consensus mechanism, that there should basically be part of the Ethereum consensus design in trying to figure out how to make that not possible. For example, one thing I know that is being talked about is should Ethereum on a protocol level issue a liquid token that represents deposits in the beacon chain and be fungible, right? Is that possible? Is it part? How much of consensus will have to be changed if there's an Ethereum protocol issued essentially, for lack of a better term, an LSD, right? And would that make it more difficult or kind of infeasible for a proprietary rehypothecated kind of LSD to grow in terms of market size? I think that that's a better discussion to have rather than is self-limiting essentially like a like philosophically sound thing. I think there's both philosophically sound arguments for and against self-limiting in terms of you should think of it maybe as like an Ethereum level improvement to the protocol so that there doesn't actually have to be this discussion. That's one way to view it, and that's kind of how I consider it.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that insight. Seraphim, what do you think, buddy? Tell us what you think and kind of the perspective being a Lido contributor.
Yeah, it's a complicated question by all means. So Lido voted against it, but that doesn't mean that one day Lido DAO is not going to vote against, not actually for self-limiting. So it could happen. My personal opinion is that it's very nuanced. I personally think I'm leaning against the idea of self-limiting because, like, first of all, Ethereum's pretty small still in terms of size, like compared to real world, right? We're trying to become the internet computer of the world and stuff, but we're still very small. And if at this point in time, we're already starting to discuss that we should limit successful protocols growth, that just sends a bad signal to the entire world that it's not a place where you can kind of grow, right? And also, we can all make a cute little rule and agree that we're gonna self-limit in a social kind of by socially what do you call it, virtue signaling way, whatever. But the point is, somebody can walk in like BlackRock and say, "Well, that's nice, but fuck you guys,"
and just completely take over Ethereum. So it all works until somebody else comes in and just doesn't care about our cute little rule. And I think that's the most likely scenario. I would rather have Lido be the top LSD protocol with which isn't perfect, but is trying to improve, has governance, has Lido V2, is trying to expand the validator set, all these things, rather than somebody like some KYC, the ML solution is just going to completely censor every transaction, right? So that's kind of my. But again, Lido DAO could vote differently next time. It could also happen. There's no, doesn't mean my opinion matters much here, but yeah. Also, it's like, yeah, again, it's just, I think we're a very small ecosystem for now. If we, at the end of the day, who's going to decide that if it's not Lido DAO that votes for self-limiting, it could be potentially Ethereum as a whole just absorbs Lido, as Sam mentioned. And I think at that point, it probably is, on a personal level, I think it's a success of Lido in a way that it became so prominent, so, so important that Ethereum just kind of absorbs that protocol. Maybe that is better. It could be something good. So, but yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of different opinions. Like even the I think it must have been a year ago, the forum post in the Lido DAO governance. It was really about like the pros and cons and everything that goes into a decision like this. And one of the conversations and one of the key kind of points was, if it's not Lido, then what happens, right? Like what's if people are concerned around one potential protocol having that level of influence, if it's not Lido, then who is it? If Lido were to self-limit, for example, then what? And I think that points the conversation and the question to Coinbase, because a lot of the conversations and a lot of the opinions were, well, alternatively, if it isn't smart contracts that's governed by a DAO, it could potentially be a centralized exchange. And a lot of centralized exchanges obviously have a much different footprint than a DAO, for example. But, Andrew, I'll pose that question your way. What do you think around this idea of protocol self-limiting or staker self-limiting?
I really apologize. Can I just interrupt for just say one more thing before I pass it on?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, because you mentioned the influence that one protocol can have. I think it's important to define what influence Lido actually has as a protocol. So again, Lido is not like one node operator that kind of can censor transactions. So it's 29 node operators, and if they wanted to collude, they could have colluded that outside of Lido. All Lido does is basically socializes rewards and penalties amongst all these node operators and validators. So Lido in its current form cannot say, we're going to be banning these transactions, we're going to be doing that or that. It just socializes these things. So when you talk about Lido, there's a part of the argument that I get, but there's also it's not one node operator that could just censor transactions or anything like that. You're actually talking about 29 node operators at the moment, potentially hundreds and thousands within the next 2 years. And that would still be better than there's 3 centralized exchanges that just own the entire network, right? So that's just my thought. So sorry.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry. It's a good little add on there. Andrew, what do you think about what he suggested, along with this concept in general?
I tend to agree with Sam and Seraphim on certain things. The general thought in my mind is it depends. I think Coinbase is obviously different than everyone else here, and the fact that we are an exchange and we do custody the ETH that is staked. And so I think there's an economic incentive for us to sort of participate in the protocol, in the Ethereum protocol, in a respectful and almost cautious way. We're only successful if the protocol is successful. And at the end of the day, we are a business. And so we're trying to make money. I think there's a lot of different ways you could go about this, but I think economic incentives are just going to push things the way they go anyways. And as we've seen, like Lido's had a tremendous amount of success, like even displacing like wrapped ETH as far as like the number of tokens minted on Ethereum. So like there's a lot of arguments that would point to like liquidity is just going to win out here, and we're not going to have this like ideal situation where you have like dozens of individual staking providers, each with like an equal share of the network. I think like liquidity does play an important role here. And so you're going to have some natural incentive to sort of like aggregate and put stake into one provider. And we've seen that with Lido. But again, I think like the protocol, as Sam mentioned, there's the options that they could redesign things or build things differently in a way that would limit it at a protocol level or incentivize things at a protocol level, such that if Lido was, I mean, you could have the Talix dream come true, where if Lido was built at the Ethereum protocol layer, you could sort of force pricing to be uniform across all the different LSTs, such that like as your sort of staking penetration grows, so does your fee, and so there's like a natural incentive to distribute stake. I think there's a lot of open questions there, and obviously you don't want to like necessarily embody the wrong code at a protocol level, but I personally just think it depends. And for Coinbase, for example, I think like there's more risks to us custodying more ETH or staking more ETH than there is necessarily like a Lido who's distributing it across like any number of 30 plus node operators. So those are things that we're always thinking about, and we definitely consider it. And there's a reason that our fee is as high as it is. Like we do consider these things, and we aren't going to just like carelessly try and win at all costs. We're definitely respectful, and in a way, like we pay our homage to the protocols we build on because we want to see these protocols succeed. Because without them, like, what business do we have? So that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point around fees there. If I'm not mistaken, it was either a tweet or a forum post that Vitalik put out there saying, a potential way to limit without, actually putting a limit is adjusting the fees at a certain point to potentially detract users from participating in a given staking protocol as a way of reducing their overall share. So it's definitely not, a one size fits all. And I think that's probably, a market's or the overall space's knee-jerk reaction to the level of dominance that, one protocol in particular has been able to garner. But, Darren, leaving you for last, I don't want to say is intended, but hey, it's potentially intended here. So tell me, what are your thoughts? Hit us with the good stuff.
Yeah, so I don't do I agree with kind of many of the things that have kind of been said. I think one of the big things is when the kind of lead researchers of Ethereum are telling you that it's not safe, and that going beyond the protocol kind of consensus thresholds undermines Ethereum, you should probably listen. in my regard, there is stuff happening at the consensus level to kind of combat some of the negative effects, although it is a consensus mechanism, so there is only so much they can do at that kind of level. I think from Rocket Pool's perspective, and look, we leave it open to everyone else to make their own call on this. As it's been said, there are going to be many different participants in this market, and they're all going to choose different trade-offs. For Rocket Pool, what we've actually said is, we will self-limit, and the reason why we will self-limit is because we will do no harm to Ethereum. Right? That is the ultimate goal, is to do no harm to Ethereum, and at this point in time, self-limiting, going beyond that limit will harm Ethereum, from the lead researcher's perspective. So that's what we've chosen to do, and everyone's open to make their own call on that. I think really, I mean, every participant needs to kind of make that call. But one thing to bear in mind is if you're undermining Ethereum itself, you're undermining ETH asset, which, you know, all of the stake is all ETH, and so you're kind of undermining that asset as well, which is a bit silly. But yeah, as I said, we'll kind of see how it kind of plays out over time. You know, hopefully, you know, Vitalik will have a shower moment where he'll come up with a great idea, and kind of like fix everything. But I think at this point in time, we've decided that self-limiting is necessary, and so to kind of not harm Ethereum.
Great, thanks, Darren. Anyone want to share any other thoughts around that before we move on to another topic?
I'll just say one thing, and it might be like a kind of spicy take, but I'm kind of glad that it's not just an obvious like, oh, well, Vitalik says this, so we do that. Like, I don't think that that's like the way people want a decentralized network to function. Like, we want everyone to to work on what they want to work on, and build in a way that is like open and decentralized. So, like, I wouldn't say that it's always obvious that you should just take like the somewhat like preordained authorities thought and just do what they say. I'm not saying that Vitalik's not smart and has probably thought about this way more than I have, but I also just appreciate the fact that there's always, it's hard to like go against the flow there, and I think that it's interesting that it's not necessarily true that Vitalik's always right or that Superviz is always right, and it's cool to see decentralization like at play in that way.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Andrew said, so it is obviously a complicated conversation. It's probably this one question alone could probably take like 5 hours to discuss, right? But like it's also about having a trade-off between having a blockchain that is completely pristine, as in line with Ethereum Wahhabism by the preordained principles, of Vitalik, or making a blockchain that actually is used. So a lot of the trading flow at the moment is around stake ETH. There's no denying. The most traded stablecoins tend to be actually USDC and USDT, which is phenomenal, actually, given that, well, I would rather like completely DeFi centric, complete decentralized stablecoin like LUSD capture all these flows, but it's just what it is, right? And what happens is that you have products like USDT that are more centralized than LUSD, but just have such a widespread adoption and actually kind of open the world's eyes into what crypto is about, that it's hard to deny its importance. And stake ETH is the same. Stake ETH isn't as centralized, of course, as Tether, but it's not on the spectrum of kind of setting up of node operation as decentralized as Rocket Pool, but it does create a product that's so great that a lot of trading flow happening on Ethereum and gas costs, as in the transactions happening on Ethereum, have to do something with stake ETH. So it also makes the chain more relevant, which is also very important, right? So, but yeah, obviously it's a nuanced conversation. It's like Lido DAO could totally, at some point in time, vote to actually self-limit. It could also happen as long as there's a good case. I think that will be the case, but it's nuanced, I think.
Well, I'll just kind of add a little bit of flavor on that. Like that's one of the arguments, right? One of the arguments is around the governance of Lido, and how decentralized is that governance? Because naturally, you kind of have to fall back on something like that if it is in the hands of that community and those token holders. So I think that's that's a bit of another conversation, right? The decentralization of DAOs and how that plays into protocol influence, but. That actually lends itself to the next topic that I wanted to ask everybody, which is the concept of decentralization. Like, how important is decentralization in ETH staking protocols? And you kind of touched on it a bit there, Seraphim, right? Like, there's so many examples outside of ETH staking of assets built on Ethereum and other chains that are exceptionally centralized, yet see enormous adoption and market cap growth and so forth and so on. So, that's an important thing and I think a lot of protocols and builders struggle with. Like even, you know, us working on EBTC, like it was an exercise of understanding like how much does decentralization matter in that design, and how much does it actually create a hindrance towards adoption or what users want, because there's obviously trade-offs in those instances. So as it relates to decentralization, you know, I'll throw the ball in Darren's court, because, you know, Rockpool obviously, you know, speaks to being one of the most decentralized staking protocols. Like, where do you see the important, how much of an importance do you see on decentralization? And more importantly, where do you see decentralization being the most important in a staking protocol?
So for staking protocols, kind of the obvious place where decentralization really matters is in the validator set. So, you know, having a decentralized validator set, which to be honest, for me means permissionless, because you can only really have decentralization with permissionlessness. So, you know, so the validator set is probably the most important from a staking perspective. The more independent node operators that you have, the greater the decentralization. And so, if anyone can be a node operator within your protocol, you're going to go on a much wider base of node operators. And we've kind of like seen that play out with Rocket Pool as well. So that's probably the most important part, because obviously that speaks to what we were saying before in terms of the decentralization of Ethereum as a whole. If each individual protocol's validator set is decentralized, then Ethereum as a whole is decentralized. So that's really important. But decentralized governance is equally, if not more important as well, because obviously that dictates how the protocol is going to develop. It's something that, you know, we're definitely very mindful of, and we're kind of like you know, working to improve over time. A lot of the stuff that's in, so we've just kind of like done a whole prioritization thing in our roadmap, and kind of, you know, improving those elements of governance, making it much more decentralized is kind of top priority. So, you know, I think over time, it's important that it's a bit tricky, because as a protocol or a startup, you have to focus. And so you have to focus on certain things. We chose the validator set to focus on, to make sure that that was decentralized. And then we're kind of like, and we kind of gone like, you know, semi-decentralized in terms of our, or at least with our governance, it's decentralized, but there's not as much on-chain power. So we need to kind of correct that. And so, you know, that's where we decided to focus, and we're kind of like building that over time. So, you know, that's kind of our focus over the next kind of 12 months. And yeah, I think it's very, very important. As you decentralize in governance is very important for two reasons. The first one is that I think overall in crypto, participatory governance. So the users of your protocol get to have a say in how it develops. I think that's really, really important. I think that's one of the things I love about crypto, and you know, Ethereum in general, is that aspect of it. The other thing is kind of, you know, much more along the lines of the fact that if your governance is too centralized, it means that you can then have an effect on the validator set, which is kind of what the researchers were kind of saying, and so that's a bad thing as well. So for those two reasons, you know, decentralized governance is very, very important, as well as a decentralized validator set.
And I think not necessarily just in ETH staking, but in general, you know, governance around operations and governance around technology, especially open source technology that a lot of us are building, are two different things. And I think a lot of that gets convoluted. You see a lot of people participating in DAO governance that have, you know, vested interest or personal interest in operational type decisions versus technology oriented decisions, if that is changing certain parameters or adjusting certain parameters in smart contracts, for example. And I think that's where the line blurs. And I think the space as a whole needs to do a lot more work in kind of drawing that line in the sand. And I think with staking protocols in particular, that plays a big role because, folks that potentially, as an example, have interest in Rocket Pool or RPL, you guys have done a good job tying RPL and our ETH together, where in other instances, not even just in staking protocols, but there is a difference between, the governance token in that ecosystem and the given protocol or asset that's created. So drawing that line in the sand and having an influence, unless there is a tie-in, I think is pretty important to your point. But Sam, what are your thoughts around decentralization? Like, where should it be, and is it important, and why? And I know Frax, Frax has made a big push recently, not necessarily just around its Frax ETH product, but Frax as a whole, and moving towards on-chain governance and what that looks like. So I'm sure you have some thoughts there, but I would love for you to share.
Yeah, so basically, first part about LSTs, they're very hard to get right in terms of all three aspects of their structure. So the way that I view it right now is, as Darren said, there's the validator set, which is very important to be decentralized if possible. Then there's the on-chain governance, right? And then there's actually a last part, which is the beacon oracle, which a lot of people don't really talk about, because right now in the current Ethereum landscape, you actually can't read beacon chain state in smart contracts. You can't just write a Solidity smart contract that says, hey, if this validator with address this, like if it missed the last block, or if it did X, Y, or Z, eject it, right? And a smart contract can't do that. So you actually have to have a system where there is people off chain, entities off chain, looking at the beacon chain and actually seeing what the performance is like, what the beacon chain state is, essentially reading the beacon chain state and actually telling the smart contracts that hold the collateral, whether it's collateral that Rocket Pool tracks that its node operators have, or for example for Lido, the rebase index, right? How much rewards was earned in the past 24 hours? So how much can everyone's balances of stETH go up? All of that stuff has to be done by an oracle, right? Eventually, there's obviously EIPs where Ethereum is working on, like the extra Ethereum protocol, where you can actually do contract ejections and beacon reads, but those are many months out. So I usually think of LSDs as like a tri-pillar, which is on-chain governance, beacon oracle, and decentralized validator set. And Seraphim brought up a good point when he said, when people criticize Lido, they have to think about what they're actually criticizing Lido for, because certain things Lido doesn't actually have the power to do that people claim they do, right? There's 29 or 30, whatever it is, independent node operators for Lido, and unless Lido like meets with them off chain and colludes or something, Lido can't actually immediately reorg like block orders or things like that and do multi-block MEV or anything, right? They're technically supposed to be truly separate entities. So I like to think about stuff in like a pillar perspective. A lot of people don't think about it like that, because right now, for example, all major LSDs, Frax Ether, Reth, Lido, stETH, all have a beacon oracle, right? They all have varying degrees of on-chain or off-chain governance. Right now, with Frax Gov being imminent in terms of being released, it is going to be fully on-chain governance. Prior to that, right now, there is an MSIG, right? For example, Rocket Pool has an ODAO, which is a lot of known signers, reputable people in the industry, right? And so that, for example, the ODAO is kind of similar to an MSIG kind of structure, right? And they all have different powers, right? Like the MSIG and Frax Ether has slightly different powers. The ODAO has slightly different powers, and the whole goal is to incrementally improve all of these things, but not in one area. There's 3 areas that they all combine to actually, kind of contribute to the overall decentralization of an LSD protocol. Building a fully LSD protocol that's decentralized is very, very hard compared to an already difficult thing to do, which is just a DeFi protocol or something on chain, because there's so many moving parts, and it's basically like building something in DeFi, but on hard mode, because you have to do beacon reads, and then there's real world aspect of the validators, and then you have to also make sure that the portion that's smart contracts is only on-chain governance and not, remnants of MSIGs or trusted signers and things like that. So I definitely think people do a disservice when they criticize obviously the criticism is good, it helps everyone improve, but like it is very, very hard to get all three of those things right. And as everyone on this panel has been saying, like there's strengths in each of the major protocols, right? Like one thing I really want to commend Lido on is their entire governance is entirely on chain, and there is no MSIG that's trusted in any way. When I personally dug through every part of it and looked through the Aragon kind of proxy contracts and governance, I was like actually going through all of the layers of like the DS proxies and stuff. And when I was seeing, oh, this is a proxy contract, I bet you like now this will be upgradable like the Oasis app was for like Maker or something. And it was like, no, actually, it actually requires an on-chain vote to actually change the implementation address. Everything is extremely professionally done, and obviously well deserved for Lido's high Lindy. And so obviously Rocket Pool's incredibly large amount of node operators that are independent, that deserves a lot of praise, and that's its own strength. And Frax Ether has unique economics that consistently has like the highest yield in terms of being designed as like a stable coin. We focused on that for V1, and I think we do deserve props in that, being able to have very, very interesting and sustainable tokenomics. And for V2, we're focusing a lot on transparency, decentralization, fully on-chain system. And for people who've been following the Frax ETH V2 design, I think we've addressed that, and now it's the time to deploy it soon. So yeah.
The key word was soon. When soon?
Soon, a couple of weeks probably. Hopefully, soon. Maybe like about a month, a couple of weeks.
Listen, I don't want to hear any time frames, because I know firsthand giving time frames is the nightmare of a builder, because it's so hard to adhere to them. Seraphim, what are your thoughts around decentralization and where it's important? Because Sam brought up a lot of great points. Like I think a point of scrutiny that I always have for any staking protocol is one, it's next to impossible to be completely decentralized. I think you can say that with almost all protocols that are building today. But a lot of scrutiny is focused in one side of that triangle. If it's on the validator side, if it's on-chain governance, but a lot of the times, if we're looking at an LST or an LSD, whatever you want to call it, that specific asset, I don't think there's many, if any, that are decently decentralized at that asset level, which plays a pretty critical role, because you can have a lot of decentralization on the other sides of the triangle, to Sam's point. But then if you have billions of dollars being integrated through this collateral asset into a variety of DeFi protocols, and there's a higher levels of centralization at the asset level, if that's a multi-sig with 20 extremely reputable, trusted people, or if it's 3 anonymous people, or if it's 10, whatever it is, if there's upgradability rights at certain levels of the collateral asset, that has a pretty big impact. And I'm not pointing by no means at Lido there, just saying in general. But we'd love to hear your thoughts around decentralization and the importance of it.
Yeah, I think anyone who's in crypto, especially in the bear market, cares about decentralization, and whatever your protocol or product is about, you find a way to grow while kind of pursuing that goal. Like even if you look at, let's say, something very centralized again, like Tether, like they're obviously very centralized. They probably, if FBI calls them up or sends them some legal paper, they have to blacklist people, which is very centralized. But they deal with that ideologically by, in their mind, buying Bitcoin every month, right? So that's one way a very centralized product is trying to promote decentralization, right? So the question for Lido initially was, how does Lido kind of pursue decentralization while actually creating a great product? And the first step was basically taking away some of that Ethereum staking power from centralized exchanges, because it's extremely concentrated in terms of jurisdiction. So if you looked at the time, I think most of them were basically in the States. Now, I'll get to the fact that not like a big chunk of Lido node operators are in America, but I'll get to that in a sec. But the point is, that was the first step: take away some of that jurisdictional concentration away from centralized exchanges and spread it around, and do it in a way that would actually win market share from them. So that was essentially Lido V1 that I would say succeeded. And then the question became, how does Lido kind of take it a step further away from just US and Europe, which is the composition of the 29 node operators, to take it beyond that? Because at the end of the day, we want a blockchain that cannot be just centralized, cannot be censored at the whim, like SEC or United States government cannot just co-opt the node operators and be like, nope, we don't like these transactions. Actually, we don't even like, you know what? We don't like the fact that we have 0% interest rates set by the Fed and you guys have 5%. That's kind of not cool. So I want that decreased. You know, there could be a scenario where the monetary policy becomes completely under the federal bank, because the node operators are operated within the United States, right? And that is a scenario we want to avoid. So short term, what Lido does now is onboarding new node operators that are based outside of the United States. I'm actually just reading now there's 2 fast track node operators for the next wave. One of them is in Latin America. So stuff like that is really important. But longer term, moving more in the direction of permissionless, similar to what Rocket Pool is doing now, permissionless node operation where people can join. They don't have perhaps not even capital, but they can be a part of the process of validation, and that increases the number of node operators by a lot more than 29. And these people will be spread out across the world, and it gets to the point where nobody can actually cancel anything. Nobody can tell node operators you can't approve that transaction, you know. And that is the dream, I suppose, of any crypto head in this space. And the question is, like, how do we get there the most strategically, the quickest, and in the way that we can actually win over, like, the increasing kind of, hate from TradFi towards us, you know? So, yeah. But obviously it's important. And yeah, exactly. What I really am impressed about Lido, about all the work that's been put into governance, that it is indeed completely on-chain. Everything, there's no multi-sigs, nothing. It's basically a proper vote for Aragon, and everything is voted on chain. So that is quite neat. Lido doesn't have to do it. Lido could have just sat down and said, oh, we're going to have 3 node operators ran by, core team, multi-sigs, and it would have still won. It wouldn't need to change, but Lido contributors said, this is not right, and let's do it. So here we are.
Well, I'll pose that question to Andrew, coming from a whole different perspective. Obviously, Coinbase being a custodial solution, like, as a whole, though, for the space, like, where do you think decentralization, like, where in particular in the stack is it most important?
Yeah, I think it's important at all layers, and I think that the group has mentioned a lot of really important factors. The one interesting thing I would say here is, like, there was like this really old talk at ETH Denver many, many years ago. And I think, like, there's a really big difference between telling a regulator or a government body that you won't do something versus, like, I cannot do something. And so being able to, like, tell a regulator, hey, we as Coinbase, we can't make the rules. We can't control this thing. Like, no matter what you want us to do, we will not and cannot do it because we can't, is really important at the protocol level and at all layers of the stack. And I think we as Coinbase obviously like are a centralized entity and do. I mean, I currently live in the U.S. and a lot of the employees do, but the thesis behind Coinbase all along has always been to sort of support this open economy and allow like the economic freedom that sort of free markets provide, really unlock a lot of people's situations that might be in countries that are more difficult to sort of have those freedoms in. So I think like Coinbase is hugely aligned with this ethos, and we're just building in like a different jurisdiction and under different rules, but we always want to be able to work on protocols alongside the community and build things that are sustainable into the future, such that they don't rely on Coinbase and they don't rely on us as a third party. We never want to be in control. We definitely want to be able to work on decentralized protocols, and so it's really important.
Actually, can I add to what Andrew said? Because, like, yeah, it goes back to the fact that I think everyone here is trying to do the good thing. We're just operating within our constraints. Coinbase is a centralized exchange. They can't do what Lido does, right? But even then, Coinbase is trying to do the right thing. When they get sued by SEC, and the next day it says, well, okay, we're going to do a Twitter space now. We're going to talk about what we think about this whole thing, and sues SEC back, and then they support various projects with Coinbase Ventures and stuff. So we all do what we can do, given our conditions, you know. And I think everyone here cares. Like sometimes you meet people from TradFi that jump into DeFi, and they really don't give a shit. They just want to sell their products, and they don't tend to stay around for too long. But whoever's here in the bear market actually cares, and they're just trying to do what they can do. And Coinbase is doing a lot, given the fact that it's a centralized exchange. It doesn't just become a puppy of the government. The moment things get heated, you guys are like, okay, we're going to set up a international entity. And Brian Armstrong's jumping up and down in Dubai. It's all flex, but it's obviously a good thing for crypto because you guys are doing what you can do, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I can be the first to say, especially a person that's been, using Coinbase for over 10 years, like, the way that Coinbase has kind of stepped to the forefront to take on a fight that a lot of folks aren't willing to take on, along with, supporting and building with the community, I think it's extremely commendable. And with that being said, let's talk a bit about the protocol side of things. So, this space is obviously exploding. You look every day, the amount of staked ETH and the amount of participants in LSTs and people with liquid staking tokens, and then protocols that are being built on top or adopting liquid tokens, and then those tokens becoming a significant part of their deposits. If that's, Aave with 1.3 billion, or Maker, obviously Frax, and a variety of others, within the Curve ecosystem as an example. But, I think that a great thing to talk about is like, what role do you think, or do we think as a group here, that LSTs are going to play in DeFi and DeFi protocols? My personal opinion is I think they're going to play a gigantic role. I think they're going to have an enormous role for a variety of reasons. One being like, the opportunity costs of not using a staked or interest-bearing version of ETH, along with, the interest in capturing that type of collateral asset in your protocol. There's going to be a variety of, extraordinary incentives around those types of deposits. And then, of course, the economics change tremendously as I tend to believe that, economic designs of these protocols are going to continue to evolve in ways that weren't possible before because of ETH staking. Prior, hey, you want to deposit in the lending market? Great. There's this, or excuse me, you want to borrow from a lending market? Okay, great. There's this interest rate. Well, now you don't necessarily even need to charge an interest rate, or that interest rate could be shrunk down by 75% or 90% or completely, because of the opportunity to get a share of the ETH staking yield in those collateral assets if you can justify the value to the user that's depositing it, and what the protocol is actually offering those users. So I think it's going to have a gigantic role. I think Sam, from an economics perspective, Frax, for years has kind of pushed the boundaries on that front. Like, how big of a role do you see LSTs playing in DeFi and kind of shaping the path forward for DeFi?
I mean, I think they'll be as huge as USD pegged stablecoins. In fact, when we launched Frax Ether, we said it's Frax's second stablecoin, technically third after FPI, but a stablecoin that's pegged to one Ether. A lot of people got confused about that. They're like, so is it an LSD? Is it a stablecoin? This doesn't make sense. Why are you calling it a stablecoin? And the idea is that it really is. The most blue chip and lendy LSD protocols. Their tokens will be used as essentially ETH, right? And if you think about it, the most important thing that POS did for ETH, other than obviously, the ESG component, the less energy usage, and things like that, and making it more robust, is that it gave a native interest rate to ETH, the asset, right? And it has actually made ETH an interest-bearing asset. And so, in order to get that interest, you essentially need to buy into one of your favorite or preferred LSDs, and so you can kind of think about LSDs as essentially commercial bank deposits in the traditional financial landscape that actually pay you interest, and like the dollars that actually come from the Fed is the ETH that actually comes from the Ethereum protocol, right? A lot of people over time will just end up using LSDs the same way people use bank deposits. In fact, one of the ways that I kind of talk about it by reversing it is I always say the dollar is just proof of stake, with the Fed setting the staking rate, right? And so it's like the Fed rate is the amount that you earn through either like money market funds, right, or something like that, and those are kind of the LSDs. The LSDs right now for ETH will have the same dynamic. Eventually, they will be the actual rehypothecated token that's used everywhere, the same way you're saying that it's going to be on lending markets, it's going to be on AMMs. That's why when we actually designed Frax Ether, we had this system where there's an interest-bearing token that essentially gets, quote, quote, the risk-free rate, aka all of the POS interest rate from validators, and then a stable coin, Frax Ether, that gets no interest rate, but then is incentivized in different places and things like that, in AMMs and in other locations. So that is how we've been able to build monetary premium. The more that either of these tokens are used for their corresponding and separated utility, the more that actually increases the total yield on the SFrax ETH, the interest-bearing one, because that's the amount that people are actually depositing in the POS vault. So overall, just in terms of economics, the main thing is these tokens will be as important as USD pegged stablecoins. And as we know, USD pegged stablecoins are essentially one of the biggest parts of crypto, and arguably the part of crypto that indisputably and objectively has a lot of traction and actually has a lot of utility, right? And so I think LSD is like the next part of that.
Yeah, I would agree, Sam. I think it's right up there too. I couldn't be more bullish on their penetration in the space and the influence in the space, and more importantly, like that fit. I think Seraphim, you talk about a lot about is there what are the actual fits in crypto and in DeFi, and outside of this obviously proving to be a fit is more about how do you reach the billions, and I think there's going to be a real opportunity there. Specifically for this asset. But I want to point the question to Darren as well, because I know Rocket Pool in particular has seen pretty exceptional growth this year and last year, or mid last year and on, with their focus in DeFi and really starting to become one of the assets and collaterals in DeFi. If that's in ecosystems like Balancer or others. but it would be great to get your perspective on, even from our ETH's perspective, like how important is DeFi when you think about adoption for our ETH and the acceleration of Rocket Pool moving forward?
Yeah, DeFi is very important. And as you said, LSTs have kind of exploded. They're kind of everywhere. And there's kind of a great reason for that. The reasons you've kind of outlined already. I think we're also kind of seeing, which is quite exciting, protocols adapting to LSTs, and they kind of give protocols a superpower, which is amazing to see. So there is going to be a lot of innovation coming up in terms of DeFi protocols, and using some of the yield as ways of kind of augmenting DeFi protocols. I think that's really exciting. That we're seeing lots of different protocols. There's a lot of kind of LST backed stable coins kind of popping up. There's interest rate protocols, interest rate swap protocols. There's existing protocols, as I said, that are kind of like adapting to using LSTs under the hood. Yeah, it's all very, very exciting, and I think that kind of trend will probably continue on, and they'll become a much kind of larger piece of DeFi, as you said, as kind of I think Sam said, they'll be as big as stable coins. This kind of like underlying primitive for DeFi.
Yeah, I agree. I think underlying primitive is a beautiful way to kind of say it, and as it relates to like economic designs, it just changes the game. Like it really does. And you can see it in a lot of examples, and we're having protocols being built specifically around this type of primitive for that reason, right? And the economics and how they can gain market share from non LSD supporting protocols, or as an example, back stable coins. But we're like, I think trying to understand what that actually becomes, like when we see the market starting to turn around in the next few years or however long, right? No one knows. According to everyone, Ripple actually turned the market around today, which I very much so doubt. But anyways, yeah, like when we think about where these designs are going to go, like you know what gets you guys the most excited in terms of how LSTs are going to be used inside of protocols, or which types of, everyone throws the term around like LST-Fi or LSD-Fi, like that next wave and that design space. And I think you might have said, Darren, like that innovation canvas, which gets me the most excited. But like, where do we see the protocols really accelerating when the market starts turning around? And I'll throw that at Seraphim, then Andrew, I'll get your opinion on it as well. But Seraphim, where do you think the types of protocols that are really leveraging LSDs are going to accelerate, over the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's hard to say over the next couple of years for now, but the ones I'm seeing now are basically, well, I suppose three types. I'm seeing stuff like something like Unsheath, where it's trying to mirror ETH price, and it contains a bunch of OSTs inside of it, and it's supposed to trade 1-to-1 to ETH. There's good and bad things about that stuff. The good thing is that you can indeed kind of aggregate all your OST exposure into one token. The bad side of it is just because you are stacking up risks or combining all those risks into one token doesn't mean you're going to get more yield, which is like very important as to like why would you give up staked ETH security? Sorry, not security, but liquidity and utility to get another token that has a similar profile, but less liquidity. So, but it's interesting. Second is you're seeing liquidity forks that use staked ETH and RETH, CBETH, etc., Frax ETH as collateral. So basically LUSD that actually gives you some rewards, and I think that's quite interesting. The problem is though, yeah, scalability is a bit more problematic. Same thing as OUSD. It's hard to scale when it's not very capital efficient, when it's not one to one. The third thing that seems quite interesting is structured products, where they're trying to create something like UXD did for Solana, but in Ethereum. So one project, full disclosure, I'm advising them, but they're quite interesting, called Ishina. So they're trying to create a vault where they got staked ETH, and then that staked ETH is used as collateral on centralized exchanges without sending it there. So doesn't have that centralized exchange risk, but they're trying to short ETH perps at the same time, so it's like one to one. And what it does is maybe it doesn't have to take off as a new stable coin of the future. It's more like it's a cool product because you got staked ETH yield plus the basis from centralized perps. So, and generally, structured products like that seem to be quite popping off in TradFi as well. Like I think Cumberland is offering something like long staked ETH, but they also sell weekly calls and put options on Ethereum. So it adds, I think, an additional 1% yield to the whole structured product. So structured products around staked ETH and OSTs are kind of also very prominent. But ultimately, my hope is that one day, if it can't be an OST, that at least people use some sort of a stablecoin backed by OSTs as means of payment, as means of transacting, where like the underlying source of yield does not come from traditional finance or banking institutions. It comes from validating the blockchain, and that's like the ultimate goal. It just has to be capital efficient, which is very hard, but I'm hoping someone's going to solve it.
I can go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, Andrew, go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, I think structured products are going to be really interesting, especially if you imagine like the path to mainstream involving institutions. I think structured products are like a really natural way for them to get involved. And I know that this isn't necessarily DeFi, but I think like Eigenlayer and what it's building with restaking, and just like at the end of the day, like where are these tokens useful? Like where can you use your collateral in a way to provide more utility to either another service or to borrow against it, so that you can go spend your money without removing your exposure to the asset. Like there's always going to be like new and interesting things there, and I'm just really excited to see what people build on that front. I think there's probably a lot more risk associated with that than we can even imagine at this point. There's probably going to be a lot of gotchas, but along the way, I think it's just going to be a really interesting journey. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting journey. I think it's going to also come with a lot of token launches around that interesting journey. But in general, we're starting to see some of the acceleration of existing types of protocols in DeFi that have reached that type of product market fit. If it's stablecoin, if it's a lending market, if it's an AMM or DEX, the reality is there isn't that much that has found that fit. And I think that's going to be the first kind of wave of adoption here is, it just makes it better, right? The economics are substantially better. And I think there's going to be a push there as we start to be more innovative around it. And some of the structured products, I agree as well. Although not, DeFi in its purest form, introducing kind of flavors of it. But you spoke about Eigenlayer. I think everyone's talking. There's been a lot of conversation around Eigenlayer, this idea of restaking. There's been some scrutiny around restaking as a whole. Is restaking good? Is restaking bad? What does that mean? I think yesterday or today, I can't remember. The caps were lifted, or as Eigenlayer said, the SIGs were signed and the caps were lifted, and they were immediately filled up with a variety of assets if they were SC, or ETH or whatever. Like, where do you guys see restaking going? Like, do we see that as becoming kind of this whole marketplace and economy, and all these other chains are then looking for or willing to pay to actually abstract, the Ethereum security layer? Is like, do we get there? Is it something that takes 5 years? Is it something that takes 10 or whatever it may be? Is it kind of part of the quote unquote narrative that the space loves to attach themselves to and talk a lot about? Um, what would you guys say? Like, Sam, what are your thoughts around restaking and the proliferation of it, if any, over the next couple years?
I mean, I think Sriram is one of the smartest peoples in the space for sure. The kind of pioneers paving the way on that is extremely promising. But I read Vitalik's full blog post where he never directly exactly was like thinking of Eigenlayer when I wrote this, but it was more like uh, obviously I'm thinking of Eigenlayer when I write this, right? And it was going through the different kinds of things where he was like, if this is the restaking thing, it's good. But if this is the terms, like if the Oracle, is faulty, then all the restakers will try to hard fork it. That's very bad, right? And I think the jury is still out whether um, the restaking collective of people will adhere to that. It kind of goes back to the self-limiting thing, right? Which is like it's kind of a social like handshake, and I think Vitalik was kind of trying to say, hey, if you guys build this like this, just like try to be socially nice. Please don't change the social layer to like the Oracle has to be right or Ethereum gets hard forked or something, right? And it's not very clear if that is what most of the restakers will agree to, right? But I hope they do, because I think it was Darren who said it really well, which is like you don't want to undermine Ethereum itself because the whole everything here is Ethereum, right? All these tokens represent Ethereum. We're all here because of Ethereum. We all love Ethereum, and kind of undermining Ethereum itself is the most value destructive thing you can do. But sometimes you get into these kind of incentive doom loops where it's like classic prisoner's dilemma, right? It's like it's kind of profitable to go in with the mind of like everyone else will be thinking about Ethereum's long-term health, and I can be a profit maximalist, and then you actually end up that cohort of maximalists gets bigger and bigger, and then you destroy everything for everyone, right? So hopefully that doesn't happen with restaking. I'm extremely bullish. I think the team Sriram has put on an Eigenlayer and all the Eigenlayer kind of support projects that will probably be launched and are probably in stealth by a lot of teams building will be really, really cool. But I just hope that they adhere to Vitalik's warning. That's kind of my view on it.
Darren, what do you think? What's your thoughts on restaking? And I point that question. I know Ari today in Eigenlayer is a pretty prominent asset that's deposited, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're kind of cautiously optimistic. I think probably the same as Sam as well. We're we can kind of see it's a fantastic idea. It makes a lot of sense. It kind of depends on what those second order effects are. That's really the where it goes. So I think we're kind of seeing how things play out a little bit, and really just to kind of see what those second order effects are, and adjust as we go. But yeah, there's not. I mean, this space is permissionless, so we'll kind of see. Yeah, as I said, cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I think naturally, the first to take a swing at such an interesting challenge is going to bring some optimism, yet cautiously. Seraphim, do you have any thoughts, or Andrew, do you guys have any thoughts around that? In particular, like the role of restake and move forward and its impact?
Yeah, I think it's like given the fact that the risk profile seems to be pretty conservative, at least visually to most people around restaking, I can totally see a scenario where you restake a bunch of stake teeth, RETH, etc. You create a restaking token, and someone's going to come up with making that liquid too, and then we're going to have like another perhaps layer of risk on top of DeFi, which is not necessarily bad, but it is indeed important to understand which risks we're taking on when we're restaking. Like if we are, actually, I would love to know what the yield profile is going to look like once they turn on the rewards, because like on the one hand, you would expect for taking more risks to have high yields. On the other hand, that should come with increased risks of losing your stake, I suppose. So I wonder what the average yield is going to be like in the end. But if it's going to be on average high, yeah, I can totally see how this becomes a prominent product and people are going to want to loop it on Aave and maybe start using that instead of LSDs themselves. But then the question will become what kind of risks we keep taking on to compete amongst each other. Because it potentially does create a doom loop of sorts where we take on more and more risk to get more and more market share. But some of these risks, unlike, like with Lido, you go on the docs and you can kind of see what's going on. It's audited, etc. And it doesn't take on more risks every quarter. And with Argulayer, you could potentially be taking on new kind of risks every single quarter, But we'll see. We'll find out what the market wants. I suspect the market doesn't want, like in TradFi, even though you have junk bonds that yield more, people kind of realized granted after 2008 and stuff, that you don't want to kind of put all your money into them. There's a reason why the yield's higher. So we'll see where we settle in terms of adoption. Like, I want to see what the highest yield product for restaking is that gets adoption, given the risks, So we'll see.
Well, I think like anything in DeFi, finding demand and supply are two different things, and a lot of the times it's very difficult to actually get people to pay market value for the services that they're receiving. So I think it's going to be some time before there's actually marketplaces that generate the type of return that supersede any type of base yield that you would get, especially when you take into consideration of additional smart contract risk. I think with that, brings the power of token incentives, which are obviously important in our ecosystem. But Andrew, I'll ask your opinion on restaking, where you see it going. In the meantime, if anybody wants to come up, just as a quick temperature check here, I'm thinking maybe another 15 minutes we can open the floor. How does that sound for you guys? Is that okay? It's good. Darren, I know you were a little tight on time. How you doing for another 15?
Oh, I'm fine actually now. No, it's all
Okay.
good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so whoever has any questions or wants to share a thought or an opinion, just raise your hand or request to speak. Bring you guys up. I see a few very opinionated friends in the audience, which is awesome. So please join and share your thoughts. In the meantime, as some folks come up, Andrew, what are your thoughts on where restaking can go and how it's starting to pick up some steam?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it a little differently from what the others have shared. So the thing that I'm really most excited about is just the sort of avenue that this provides teams and builders to sort of build on this central like locus of security that is Ethereum. I know of like numerous teams that in the past have launched their own blockchain or launched their own project that wanted to build something, I would say, on top of Ethereum to begin with, but they just faced challenges with sort of just like the high fees or various things about the protocol that they couldn't change that they needed to change in order to build what they wanted to build. And so the thing that excites me most about it is really just the fact that it unlocks really new use cases that can kind of tie back to Ethereum. And I agree that there's always like these tail risks, and you don't want social consensus or the rules that govern Ethereum to be anything but like the validator set itself. And it's scary to say, hey, this validator set should go like do this thing over here, and if there was ever something bad that forks the chain, they would then have outsized impact or reason to go and overrule the rules that were given to them. But I think like there's already these risks today, and it's really just something that we're probably going to just monitor and think about more and more as the use cases pop up. Like the primary one would obviously be stable coins. Like you have billions of dollars issued on a canonical chain, but say there was ever like a large Ethereum fork again, like wouldn't Tether have some sort of say in which fork is the right fork? Because they only have US dollars backing like one of the USDTs. They can't pick both chains. So I think there's always going to be like these tail risks, and it's definitely going to be painful. I think there's probably going to be some lessons learned, but I'm just really excited to see what teams build on top of it, now that they're able to like really leverage the security of Ethereum and tie their sort of their core messaging around decentralization and truly being able to build like an Oracle solution, for example. Like being able to build an Oracle solution that ties its value back to Ethereum is like really interesting. And maybe Chainlink does that. Maybe like the value prop for Chainlink is that it ties its security back to Ethereum, and DeFi becomes more trustless because of that.
Oh, thanks, Angela. That's a good perspective. Yeah, like I think a lot of the times we, how many times, I don't know about you guys, but I'm on a call or I'm talking to somebody, the amount of times I say, oh yeah, it's been, a year, but it feels like 100 in crypto. Like things move so fast and there's so much, such a roller coaster. It's unbelievable. And with that, we tend to forget that the merge just happened, right? Like we haven't even started to see the amount of innovation that's going to happen in this new state, in this, in kind of this new world, which gets me really fired up. And I think, restaking's really just, one of potentially hundreds of different kind of flavors of that level of innovation, which is exciting, right? Um, just to engage some of the folks that jumped up, Caesar, what's up? If I'm not mistaken, you used to wear a hat, and I remember you from the early Yearn days, but I might be wrong. But how are you?
Yeah, that's me. I've got the sandwich now because I'm the snack sandwich. Anyhow, I got a question for Sam actually. You guys probably, those of you that know me, I really like logic flows, but I'm kind of lazy to do math. So I'm wondering if like you guys, if you've got any feedback on how your model is working, because like the Frax model is very different than most LSDs. LSDs usually have a socialized yield, so everybody's considered equal. They're all sharing in the yield, and then there's governance tokens to subsidize or boost that yield in certain places. But with Frax, you have the two separations. You have the people who decide to get the yield, and then the people who decide to get the Frax incentives. So there's that separation. And I'm wondering if you guys are finding that this model is actually producing better results than having everybody being in the same pool together, basically.
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, this is why we consider Frax Ether like a stable coin. There's a token that gets no interest, and then there's a token that gets all of the POS interest called staked Frax Ether. There's a graph on Frax Facts for people that have been there. It's our like dashboard and analytics that shows where Frax Ether, the stablecoin, is actually being used. And to be clear, if 100% of Frax Ether, the stablecoin with no yield, is just deposited in the POS vault, right? That just turns Frax Ether into like Steth or Reth, right? Everyone just gets the POS interest, and then it just the APR becomes very similar to Steth, right? But the way that Frax Ether works is you can go and do anything with your Frax Ether. You can obviously go on Curve and LP it. We incentivize, bribe and vote for the Curve pool, and you can also go put it in other AMMs and do other things, right? And so we have a chart on Frax Facts that shows where the Frax Ether is. Where is the stable coin that gets no yield, but gets like incentives and other things, and has other utility. For example, on Frax chain that's coming. As a side note, it'll be gas and stuff like that. And you can see that the chart that says the percent of Frax Ether that's used everywhere is slowly going up. It started out as only like a couple percent. Now it's over 10%. I think last time I checked, it's 11, 12%, something like that, which means that people are using the Frax ETH stablecoin in different places that have utility that's not in the curve pool and not in the POS vault. It's actually other places. It's actually what we call monetary premium, which means people using it as money itself in other places. They actually use it, what we like to call it, as a WETH replacement. Like, wrapped Ether is just WETH. We actually like to call it, it's just a better replacement for WETH. And we see that number going up. So like objectively, we have statistics, we have real-time dashboard for that, and we've seen the number go up and that monetary premium for Frax Ether go up. And so that's also how the higher rate for the LSD token, the one that actually yields interest, consistently goes up, right? Because the more Frax Ether is doing something else somewhere else, there's less actual Frax Ether tokens able to be staked in the POS vault, right? Imagine only half of the Frax Ether stablecoins are staked in the POS vault, right, as a staked Frax Ether. Then that means only half of the supply of Frax Ether is getting all of the POS yield from all of the validators, right? And so that means it's actually twice as high as something like Lido or ETH or something like that. And that's part of our view of like stable coins, right? Like, how is Tether earning $2 to $3 billion of revenue every quarter? It's because people actually use Tether monetary premium. They don't expect a interest rate. It has so much monetary premium that people are using it on exchanges and DeFi. Same thing with USDC, and so the interest rate that Tether earns or Circle earns is the difference of the monetary premium and the interest rate that they are earning, right? The higher the monetary premium, the more people will just use your asset without expecting an actual interest rate from it, right? And so we built Frax Ether in a way to allow us to actually harness and build up that monetary premium. Whereas if you're paying the interest rate exactly equally to everyone, like Steth or Reeth, then the thing is, that's great, but you can't ever harness the monetary premium. Even if your thing has a lot of monetary premium, you end up paying the whole interest rate to every single holder. And so obviously this doesn't mean like Lido can't do this, or like Rocket Pool can't do this. You could actually separate it out if they wanted to do the stable coin kind of playbook, the monetary premium playbook. But that's how we built it. We're actually seeing success. That's how also we're able to, even at larger and larger numbers, provide a slightly higher APR than, for example, Lido and stuff, because we have a slowly building monetary premium of utility. And it's not like some kind of secret sauce or something. It's just a different way of executing stuff, like looking at it as building money rather than building kind of a yield product. And there's if anyone else wants to do that, it's actually pretty simple. It's not like a trade secret. Lido can split it, and Rocket Pool can if they end up thinking that that's a good idea of sorts. So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like, I'm a big fan of all LSDs. I try to participate in as many as my budget will allow, of course, and Frax is definitely one of them. And one of the things I do notice about the Frax stablecoin ETH is it is a stablecoin to ETH. So you don't, when you do provide liquidity to it, you don't have to consider impermanent loss. Like it's literally 1-to-1. It should be at all times 1-to-1. Like, of course, there's peg risk, but there's just no impermanent loss, right? No one can extract that impermanent loss through arbitrage or anything like that. So I like this. I like this model, and I'm happy to see that it is succeeding. And of course, I do see that, like, you got the stake, the POS, you called it the POS vault, to the staked Frax ETH. I do see it around in DeFi as well. Like, there is places where you can use it as collateral, so you can still use ETH to, like, mint a stable coin for say. And I like that. So I just thanks for your time and for your answers.
So guys, if there's any other questions or anyone wants to share an opinion, please raise your hand and come up. I'll kind of give it a couple minutes while I just say, obviously, massive thanks for everyone joining, Seraphim, Sam, Darren, Andrew. I think this was awesome. Having an open conversation like this around some of the questions that a lot of people ask every day, and there's kind of like, this buzzing debate around on crypto Twitter and within the industry, being able to address them head on, I think is critical. I'm excited to do more of these. Of course, you guys are always welcome to join again. And yeah, like this was great. I really appreciate the candidness of everyone's answers. Will, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, that was definitely equal parts insightful, informative, and also super entertaining. So yeah, to echo what Spada said, everybody's welcome back for future versions of the stakeout. So yeah, I guess we'll wrap it. A reminder to everybody listening, this is the first in a series. So if you haven't already, follow EBTC protocol for updates on future events like this one, and of course to learn more about the protocol's upcoming launch. A recording of this will exist on Twitter here, but we'll also post it to the Badger DAO YouTube channel. So if you aren't following us there, head to our link tree and you can follow along on that channel. But thanks again to all of our guests again, and of course our listeners for joining the first ever stakeout. Looking forward to many, many more, and of course there's lots of conversations to be had. So we'll catch you all at the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
guys.
Be well.
Thank you, everyone.
Ciao, ciao.